PQL can be an LLM killer. If you're like me, you default to using Claude, ChatGPT, whatever you're using to try to fix your problems in Solonis. However, as you've probably been noticing, it's not the best at handling PQL. The reason is clear. ChatGPT and Claude, all of these LLMs have been trained with massive amounts of data. However, when looking through the internet, it's clear that SQL dominates. There are thousands upon thousands of articles, niche repos, GitHub articles that all reference SQL. So whenever you ask a PQL question, this LLM that's been trained on very generalized information gets confused and defaults to SQL. But don't worry, we have a solution. What I want to walk through today is building up Claude and the use of these LLMs to be extremely beneficial for project-specific cases. So we're going to do that through a few different cases and lenses that we can take to really filter down our approach and make sure that we're getting the most out of the LLM of our choice. So first, before we really dive into how we do this, let's kind of set the scene. At its most basic level, LLMs are incredible, right? They've been generalized to a level that makes them an incredible tool for just about any use case, right? Whether it be creative writing or analysis or code or songwriting even, LLMs can do it. At that same time though, that generalization comes at a cost. With that, we're not able to always dictate exactly how our LLM is responding and using the kind of methodology and logic that we would ideally prefer. So how do we go about solving that? Well, that's going to be the first part of this video where we're going to focus on Claude skills. Skills basically allow us to customize how Claude is handling our answers, what process it goes through in responding to us, and how maybe it outputs these in a specific context. Then we're also going to move on to that exact other side of the coin that LLMs can struggle with, which is that lack of context. So again, it's been trained on an incredible amount of data, but that's just not the use case specific data that we often work with in Solonis. So that's where we're going to introduce projects which really let us compartmentalize the information that we're handling, provided specific context, whether that be related to goals, KPIs, or company data, that it can then comfortably rely on when providing answers. So let's jump into that first part, which is actually building a skill in Claude. So Claude might look something like this. If you're new to Claude, you won't have this nice array of previous conversations that I've had in the past. But the important part that we're going to focus on is going to be up here in the top left. So Claude is extremely simple to set up with the use of skills. Luckily, this isn't something that you have to take on yourself. So if you want to benefit from other people's development or experience, you can do so as well. What we're going to first look at is where you go. So you start off in this Customize tab, which lets you customize your Claude experience through the use of either skills or connectors. If you're interested in connectors, make sure to leave a comment, but for now, we'll start with skills. Skills are then where we're going to be able to add these exact little basically tools that Claude will be able to reference in future conversations, depending on the question provided. The creation of skills can come in a variety of formats. One option is you build a skill directly with Claude in chat. This is probably the easiest option ever. Any of you can build a skill in the next 5 minutes. All you have to do is press the plus button, go to create skill, and create with Claude. You can also do this natively in a chat that you already have existing just by saying, hey, Claude, I want to build a skill, and you list out a few basic requirements. That's actually how I've built the skill that we'll be referencing later on, but it's super simple. Any of you can do it. At the same time, you can upload skills. So with the file that we can provide you for the Solonis expert skill that we've developed in-house, you can easily upload this to your own Claude and start using it from tomorrow. The same is true though for any skill that has been created and published online. So if you want to find a specific skill that helps with recipe creations, go online, type in Claude cooking skill, and I'm sure you'll find 100 different options that you can download and implement into your Claude. So this is an extremely powerful tool. Not only is it easy to develop completely custom skills for yourself, but you can also easily leverage skills that other people, potentially more experienced people, have created. So make sure to combine both of these options for the most optimal setup for Claude. Let's look at what happens once you've actually developed a skill. A skill is basically just a grouping of very specific instructions that you've provided Claude to continuously reference in future questions. So what we see here is that there's an actual specific skill within Claude that helps in developing skills. The one that we're going to focus on is instead the Solonis expert skill. As you can see, the majority of this is actually just a set of instructions. I've specified how to handle uncertainty, what are the core areas of Solonis, including PQL, but also amplifying its kind of scope to include PAM and OCPM and action flows. By more generally explaining where to get information from, what sources to use, common pitfalls and caveats, I've basically been able to outline to Claude what information to rely on when I provide a question relating to Salonis. And that kind of drives us to this final part as well, which relates to how do you use these skills. So this can be in a few different ways. The most common is, imagine I have a skill here. If I ask any question that relates to Salonis, for example, please help me explain PAM to a new Salonis user, chances are that it'll identify that PAM is one of the topics that we've outlined, and I've already mentioned Salonis, and so it immediately starts reading this Salonis expert skill. However, you can even be more explicit by using a backslash, and the backslash is now prompting Claude to look for a skill. And so I can specifically reference Salonis expert within my chat now, and it has to use that skill. Again, extremely simple, but a very powerful tool. So right now, this is a pretty new account. I only have 2-3 skills. Make sure that you have 10, 15, 20, because the more skills you have, the more niche knowledge you're able to provide Claude. And the last very useful little tip that you can leverage is that within this customized bar, if you've created a skill and you're very proud of it, for example, I've made a very cool skill about consulting and making slides around consulting, taking into consideration, custom format and colors and whatnot. You're able to share these skills simply by pressing share and changing it from only people invited to everyone at your organization. And that's how not only can you improve your own productivity and make sure that you're producing the best content possible, but everyone in the organization gets equally empowered. Okay, with that being said, we can then move on to a little bit of the next step in using Claude, which is this idea of amplifying the context available and making sure that it can help you regardless of how niche your project in Salonis is. So now we're going to look at projects within Claude. Projects are by far my favorite feature of Claude, and everyone has to be using them. So why is this important? Well, relevant context is this idea that LLMs are constantly struggling with, right? Again, they have to reference hundreds of millions of different training points while we are focused on a very particular problem, whether that be purchase to pay in procurement or something even more niche like airport operations. You need it to have relevant company information, project information, in the case of Salonis, data model and infrastructure information, so that it can help you in a way that's actually reliable and useful. So projects, very generally, are just allow you to better organize the information for Claude to reference. So, for example, a project can be something as general as slide creation or internal marketing. But in my case, I'll have specific projects for each of the projects that I'm on. So for example, the use case that we'll be working through is a airport consulting project. And that's where we can really dump in information and make sure that Claude in the future, whenever I have a question about my airport consulting project, I'll be able to reference very specific material, very relevant material, and that Claude can reference that same material and pull from it directly. So let's look at how I've divided properly setting up these Claude projects and what material can be most beneficial here. I've divided into 4 buckets. Really, 3 of these are going to be about the actual content that goes into the project, and this last one is more of an approach in using Claude and using projects. The main idea is that you want to make sure that Claude has all relevant information. The first step in doing that might be just to provide very general information regarding your customer or your project. This can be a collection of different items, whether that be transcripts from meetings, kickoff slides, or documents. You just have to make sure that that context is there. Really laying a solid foundation of what my project looks like from a technical standpoint is extremely important. So by that, I mean clearly outlining all of my OCPM definitions, events, perspective, relationship, objects. Everything should be included so that when I'm asking Claude to generate some PQL for me, it knows what objects it can reference. It knows how these relationships should look like, so it knows whether to use bind or PU. All of these elements are only possible if it knows that underlying structure. And so I make sure to provide that in one sense from OCPM definitions and in the other sense through that data model design. Actually, a very cool feature I'll show you there is the ability to fully export your OCPM data pool, or any other data pool for that matter, as a JSON file, which gives very easy and straightforward context to your model, so your model knows exactly which transformations are there, what the objects look like, what fields they have, and everything else. It's a very simple 2-minute procedure, but it massively helps improve the quality of these technical answers. Now we'll move more into this final point, this idea of a continuous cycle. Why is that there? Well, Claude, as amazing as it is, it can run out of memory. So one of the main things that we want to do when we're using Claude constantly throughout the day is we want to have a backup system so that if I'm in a chat that I've been, using for 2 days to answer this one SQL question in the back end, if I get hit with an error message saying memory capacity full, I want to have a workaround. The easiest workaround at that point is to ask Claude to summarize that conversation and bring that up or add it to the project as additional context. So it lets you basically create a new chat, get over that memory issue, but still reference all of that context and all of that useful building that you've done previously. More so than that though, into this comes the idea that Claude can easily accompany you across these to-dos, across all the tasks that you have open, whether they be technical, whether they be in relation to weeklies. And so constantly improving the context that is available to it is key. You don't want this to be static files that you dump and forget about. You want to make sure that they're updated. You want to make sure that you yourself are adding new context or adding Claude to summarize new context. Basically, you want this to be a living environment. So you want to make sure that you're updating it as much as possible, because the more updated that information is, the more updated the answers will be. In relation actually to that last point, let me know if in the comments you're interested in a method of reducing your token use by around 70%. There's a bit more of a technical topic, but Obsidian is basically an application you're able to use with Claude that massively improves performance for those very technical users out there. So let me know if in the comments if this is something you want to take a look at. For now, we'll leave this be. This is really kind of the next stage in Claude usage. It's not for everyone, but make sure you let me know if it's something you're interested in. With that being said, let's go through kind of a quick demo here to set this up in Claude for our fictitious airport. So imagine I'm starting a new chat. I've just been provided a new project from Apolix. I've had a few kickoff sessions, discovery sessions. Maybe I've met the team already, and all of this I want to be able to summarize, or I already have summarized with Claude, and I now want to start a project so I can really get started or hit the ground running when I start developing. So what I have kind of as the first part of that is I can show the document itself. So here we have a Word document that Claude has actually created using all the information I provided. So you'll see obviously a very general intro, then we have a summary. More interesting though, we have background on the company itself, pain points, data sources, project scope, the list goes on. As you can see, this is all obviously dummy data, so don't try getting any ideas from this. But the important part is that I've been able to summarize basically the entirety of my project scope in one document that Claude is going to be able to reference for the foreseeable future. So this is going to be kind of my single source of truth. If anything changes to the scope, to the stakeholders, maybe we drop off an entire process that we are going to analyze, I have to make sure that I change this in the document and re-upload it. So make sure to keep your documents, your information, this knowledge center in your project as updated as possible. Now that we're back in Claude, we can show how to actually look at this chat through a project context scope. And of course, if your chat is not already part of a project, you have to make sure to add it through this little drop down. I won't go over that because then you'll see my personal projects as well. But I've already gone ahead and done that. So now we're within this project scope relating to an airport. So how do we add additional information, right? Because right now, all that Claude knows is that this is a separate project. So it has some information, but we actually haven't provided or augmented this at all. So let's see how we can do that. You have to first navigate to the project section on the left. Then you'll find your specific project. And once you enter that, you'll see that there's an entire files, instructions, and memory section on the right. The one that we'll be taking extra time with is this files section. So what we're able to do from the files is go to or grab a specific document and drop it into the files section. And this is now something that Claude can continuously reference. Again, as you've seen, this was a pretty big document. It's only taken up 1% of the total capacity. So don't worry too much about just dropping information in there, but it's always good to keep it tidy so that we can still reference it. Instructions are also another thing you should definitely include. These can be more general, right? So now it has scope, it has the team, but in the instructions, I might just put a disclaimer as to the kind of content that I wanted to provide. Maybe this is a very technical team that I'm working with, so I wanted to provide me extremely detailed technical answers constantly, so maybe I'll include that in these instructions, but make sure that that's a personalized thing that you can really work on. Once that's done, then you're really able to make sure that from now on, I can create chats that reference this information. I can do that simply by starting a chat and adding this chat to my project. Let's see how we can further amplify the context. So right now we've taken care of that first pillar that we've discussed, right? That idea of general project info, but we haven't looked at OCPM definitions or data model design. So let's quickly show how you can actually do that. And this is where that cool JSON trick that I mentioned will come up. Take, for example, this airport fictitious company that we're supposedly working with. Right now you can see that there's an OCPM data pool relating to this. Ignore that red status, this is again dummy data. But the important part here is that we have data, we have an OCPM environment that we've created, right? 18 objects, 23 events, 142 transformations. There's content here. One option is for me to go object by object, copy pasting whatever we have in the definition, then pasting that into another document or into Claude directly and letting it summarize. That might be a few too many steps. The thing is, we don't have to do any of that. Luckily for us, Celonis has a feature that lets us extract basically the entirety of the information within this data pool, super simply in a file format that Claude can actually interpret. So the way we do that is that we go to the data pools page where we have our, in this case, airport data pool set up. And then by going to the 3 dots on the side, we can get to the actual menu and press export. This will then download all the information from the data pool into a JSON file that we can then easily upload directly into Claude. So if we go back to Claude, we now have this JSON and we can reference this as a file that Claude can be leveraging in the future. So just dropping that in now. So now we've done those first 2 pillars. Now we've done the company intro and profile and context, whatever was encompassed, within those first few meetings that we summarized. And now we've just added that OCPM structure. Basically now we're only missing that third element, that idea of the actual data model. The reason we have to specify this, even though we've provided that data pool JSON file, is that unfortunately Claude does struggle with identifying that perfect data model structure just from the relationships and the OCPM definitions that we've provided. So from the JSON file, it can get the object names, it can get the events, it can get the kind of basic relationships between these, and very importantly, it can get all the fields, but it can't identify this larger perspective. The way we solve this is going to be super simple. We'll make sure to go into that same OCPM environment, into our objects and events, and into whatever relevant perspective we want to focus on. In this case, we're going to focus on passenger experience phase 2. And when we open this up, you get that same interactive UI that all of us are familiar with. But what I'll do very simply is screenshot this so that I can then upload this directly to Claude as something it can reference in the future. So as you see here, Claude is also able to take images as one of these files. And again, images might not be the best context, so you're also able to verbally describe it if it's not just for a quick video here. That might be a better solution that you include in your documents because the images actually take up quite a bit of file space. So just a quick caveat there, it's the faster approach, but it does take up more memory in this project. Similarly, the JSON file is very heavy, so if you want to redact some of that, work through it with Claude iteratively, you don't have to drop all of this in and kind of leave it. Again, Claude is your best friend here. Drop in that JSON file, maybe drop in the relevant perspective, and workshop with Claude to see which parts of the JSON are relevant and which ones aren't. However, even though there's some important caveats there, we're now at the point where I've fully set up a project for my airport fictitious company. I have the relevant project information summarized for Claude, and more importantly for myself as a technical consultant, I have the entirety of the data model, the entirety of the OCPM structure, events, objects, etc. And now I'm in a great position to ask PQL related questions, to ask for front-end questions. Even more so, I can ask about design or tips on KPIs because it has all of this context. So super important that if you're using Claude or really any LLM, make sure you provide it as much context as possible, but keep it formatted or keep it organized in a way that you can also interpret so that you can constantly kind of refurbish and update what's available. Now that we've covered the basics there, let's jump into some quick tips and tricks, just a few quick points that I think can further step up your game. When we talk about Claude tips and tricks, I always reference again that first idea about the model context having been exceeded. Again, we mentioned this previously, but super important here that if you do run into this error, just ask Claude to summarize this exact chat. And once it does so, and once it produces a Word document, click on that Word document, or it'll actually appear as a pop-up on the side, and you can simply add to project. And that'll add it as additional context that it can reference in the future. Moving on, if you're on a Mac, this is super useful. Again, you can quickly ask Claude something by opening up the app itself, but maybe even better is if I double-click Option, I get a very minuscule tab appearing at the bottom, but this lets me directly ask a quick question. So if I'm in the middle of something, I'm working maybe in a data job or I'm writing some complex PQL, and I have a question, I'll drop it in here, close it, keep focusing on my current goal while Claude is thinking in the back, and then I'll switch over whenever I need. But this is a super nice, simple, very clean layout that you can constantly reference. And then for the last piece of little tips and tricks, Claude is much more than just a Claude chat. We also have Claude Cowork and Claude Code. Claude Code is incredible, especially if you're very technical or a developer, but I'd say for most Salonis use cases, not as useful. Claude Cowork can take a little bit of getting used to, but it's extremely powerful. Claude Cowork, as a quick summary, has the ability to control and kind of explore your own files on your computer and take some autonomous action within that. So if you need some inspiration, some quick, easy setups that you can use just to test its power can be to, for example, have it set daily reminders based on to-dos that you've already uploaded within the project as context. It can then send you messages or keep an open list of these to-dos on a daily basis, update them accordingly, also maybe write files or update these files within your computer itself. And as a very potentially cool use case here, we can ask it to autonomously scrape Salonis release patches that are published online for new features, for new components that are cool or interesting. And if your context is good enough in the project, it can even say, not only is this a cool component, more so than that, it's a component that you can actually use. Because, for example, you're looking at your on-time in-full delivery rate over time. There's a new feature that perfectly lets you show a KPI over time. You should pay attention to it. So it's a really powerful tool. Kind of explore it. It takes some getting used to, but I think it can add a lot of value to a project. Great. So with that, I think we've now set a very good foundation for you to use Claude to the best of your abilities for Salonis. So we've looked at fixing the specialization issue that all LLMs face through the use of skills. Again, you can either use this massive marketplace of available skills from online, download those and upload them super easily, or sometimes better yet, you can custom create a skill for yourself. Also, we looked at the issue of context that LLMs face, specifically the fact that when we're working in Salonis projects, we're working with custom processes, very niche, customer profiles or whatnot. And so we want to make sure that Claude has the most specific and valuable information to reference when we ask it questions. And for that, we set up projects within Claude, and we upload very specific customer information, such as an overview of the project, an overview of OCPM, and an overview of that data model, all three of which should be continuously updated as you progress through your project. I hope that sets a clear stage. If you liked what you've seen but want more information, maybe another layer into what Claude can do, let me know. But again, Claude is an extremely powerful tool for Salonis. If you've liked this type of content, please make sure to like and subscribe. That way you'll always stay in touch whenever we post new videos. Also make sure if you have a specific request for an upcoming video, just leave it in the comments and we'll take a look.